Yo, we back with another video. So today we're going to be starting our battle guide video series, which essentially is going to be going over a lot of the things that the tutorial doesn't really tell you in this game. So let's get right into it. We're going to be starting off with team formation. Like I said, there's a lot of things that the actual tutorial doesn't touch up on, which is going to be very important when you are playing the game going forward, right? So we have teams, right? So we're going to be using the one that I already kind of have semi-listed for as an example. So when you're building a team, there's a lot of things that you want to note before we actually get into how to build the team. There's two different types of characters that do damage. You have characters that do cursed power damage, and then you have characters who use physical power to do damage. Of course, you want to build characters around that character that can utilize how or buff how much damage they're going to be doing with that typing. So for example, you have a character like Todo. Naturally with Todo, you don't want to have a character like Gojo behind him. For example, you want to have a character like Itadori behind him because he boosts taijutsu damage, which is essentially physical power. So there is a little bit of synergies and things you have to make note of. I've seen a lot of people making a little bit of mix-up teams, and they'll have characters that boost like physical power, and your main carry is literally boosting power. So it's like, what are you doing? You're working against yourself. You're not even really giving yourself any buffs. You know what I'm saying? So that's going to be very important when you are building your teams. So now let's talk about our team building and our formation. So in other games, they have usually a setup of, having your DPS slash carry, the tank, and the support slash healer, which is usually your trifecta in most games. In this game, we don't really necessarily have a trifecta. It's mainly just a duo, if I'm gonna be real. It's just like buffers and your DPS characters. Of course, there is times where you might want to have, a tank, but it's super rare that you may need a tank. And if you do, you can actually use Gojo with a taunt memory to actually do some tanking, right? Since he avoids all damage. So it's kind of iffy on tanks on this game at the current moment. Maybe in the future, they'll kind of change that. But right now, you don't really use tanks. So the team, when you're making teams, usually how you build the team will always end up in this situation where you have two buffers. You have your third spot, which is usually going to be either a buffer or another DPS. So it's more of a flex spot, situational spot, if you will. Your fourth slot will be your carry, and then your backup will be your actual flex spot. This will either be another DPS or a buffer, depending on what you choose on your third slot, right? So I'll just kind of give you an example, right? Let's say I want to run a team where it is more equalized with just buffers. Right, so I'm gonna put Momo here, so now I have three buffers, right? And then let's say my carry is, we're gonna use Gojo for an example because everybody has Gojo. This would be my team, right? Now obviously Gojo leaves after 7 turns, so naturally on your 5th slot you would want to have another carry. Boom, that would be your team setup. I did see like this notion going around of where you put Gojo in the back line. You do not want to put Gojo in the back line for a couple of reasons, because I know you're trying to keep it so that way you don't waste his turns early, but it's not going to be helping you in the long run, just because when you think about it, your buffers are here buffing your team. If you had like Nobara out first instead of Gojo to like, use him as a backup, what ends up happening is you have your DPS here and you're going to be using all your buffer skills to actually make your Nobara do damage, right? So you're basically working backwards, because by the time your Gojo actually comes out and he's in the field, what ends up happening is you have no curse energy to buff him, so he's not getting that damage boost. On top of that, you also have to stack up all his ult still too to do damage. On top of that, not only did you put him in your backline and you're already almost halfway through the fight and you're like, most of your characters are dying, you could have avoided taking all that damage if you had Gojo in the front slot, because now you could have had a 25% chance to actually not take damage from enemies, right? Because they would attack Gojo instead, right? So that's one of the reasons why you do not want to put Gojo in the backup slot. It's very, 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 very rare occasion that you have him in the backup slot. You want him to be out in front. If you need to make sure that you're trying to get through these 7 turns very quickly, just put another DPS character so that way you can clear through wave 1 and 2 very quickly, so that way you can get to the final wave and just nuke with your DPS characters. And then obviously have your buffer in the back, just in case if Gojo does leave, you still have your other DPS carry, and then you have 3 buffers to make sure that your second DPS can actually carry you the rest of the way, right? But yeah, that's usually how the team setup is. You're gonna usually have 2 buffers on your team. Your third slot is gonna either be a buffer or a utility like Inumaki. Your 4th character is going to be your DPS character, Gojo, Nobara, Itadori, whoever it may be, and then you're gonna have your 5th slot be another DPS character or another utility, depending on what you have chosen for your 3rd slot. Now let's talk about position priority, because position priority is also important when you are building this game, right? So most of the time in general, you're going to be putting your buffers in the front, right? But there's one thing to note. Buffs always activate no matter what. They'll be the first thing to activate within the turn. So even if you have them in the last position, they will always be using their buffs first. But the reason why we have them in the front is because you have some support characters like Yaga, for example, who have buffs and debuffs. And buffs are prioritized over attack skills, but the issue that you have is you want to make sure that you have, if you're going to use your debuffs, which are your attack skills, you want to make sure that they're first in the priority list, because since all attack skills are in the same list of priority, whoever's in the first slot will be the first one using their attack skills, right? And then your second slot, and then your third slot, and then your fourth slot. So if I had the position of Gojo over here, right, and then I still have my buffer here, and he's always able to activate his buffs before Gojo. If I needed to use his debuff skill, which is this one, he would be the last one to activate it, and then Gojo would not benefit from it, right? Because he's the last one attacking, because the debuff skill is an attack. So that's why you always want to put buffers who use buffs and attacks in the front. So it depends on the character. Characters who do have a mix of buffs and debuffs, you kind of want to have them in the front, just because, you know, if you need a debuff, it's an attack skill, and you want to make sure those attack skills are going off before your carry's attack skills. So what I'm saying is, in 90% of the scenarios, you always want to make sure that your DPS character is the last in your team, in the last slot. Now let's talk about memories, because memories are going to be really important when you're building your characters as well, right? So obviously when you are like building your team and you have a specific motive for them, for example, we have this team right here. This team is going to be an old charge rush slash old nuke. Basically, it's going to be a nuke comp. That's basically what we're going to call it, right? In most cases, we're obviously going to have Gojo in it, right? And like I say, he's going to be in the last slot because he's going to be the last one attacking, so he should always be there. When you're building out your memories, you want to understand what you're using them for and what kind of content you're tackling, right? So let's say I'm trying to do some score event boss where I need to do as much damage as possible, and that's why I'm using this nuke strat. What you're going to want on your Gojo is going to be something that is going to help him maximize his damage when he ults. So most of the time, you're going to be using, memories like non-standard, which is the hollow purple Gojo memory, or you're going to be using the free-to-play memory that you can get from Formidable Foe, which is going to be this memory. It is going to be Pride. It's a really nice memory. It gives you curse tech stats, right? Which obviously Gojo does damage with curse, so this is definitely going to benefit him. On top of that, it does provide a 60% curse technique increase to self for two times. Basically, it's 2 turns, and it can be used after every 5 turns, right? So it's going to be very good for Gojo, especially when you're going to be trying to nuke, even before you're trying to nuke as well. But yeah, you're going to build him for a nuke comp. You're going to want to build him with a memory that is going to increase his damage. Of course, there's other memories that you can use which can actually increase how fast you get your ult gauge. So for example, I was using Live a Long Life early on in the game because what it does is it provides ult gauge for yourself, right? It was a good temporary option that I had since I don't have non-standard and I need to get ults quickly, right? So there's different ways of building them, but most of the time your carry is always going to have a memory that's going to be maximizing their damage. So you're going to be using a memory like Jogo. Luckily, this is free to play, so everybody should be able to get it in the future. I've already made videos on how to beat him. Now we have Inumaki, right? Inumaki is a very flex pick. He's just here to charge ult gauge. So being able to keep a consistency on curse energy is good. So if you have memories that can provide him curse energy, very good. If you have a memory that can increase damage when you ult, so like this one, for example, 30% damage dealt increase to all allies when using ult skill, boom, that's what you're going to be using on support characters, right? You're going to be using ones that can provide utility and support, so that way you can maximize the amount of damage with your carry, right? So for here, we're going to be putting this one because this provides ult charge gauge, so he can literally just be a battery in itself, where you can have ult charge gauge from not only his second skill, which is right here, but you can have ult charge gauge as well from the ult charge rate amount as well from the memory, right? Then let's say I have Nanami, right? I want to do more damage because obviously it's a nuke comp. I would use something like, maybe this, for example, right? This will be increasing, all the allies damage dealt by 30%, right? one time in one turn, boom, you'd put it on him. If not, you could also use like a support memory that provides survivability for your team, that provides damage reduction, like, you know, Sukuna's Vessel, which is also good. It does give him a survivability. And then, like, let's say for Yaga, because he's also another support character, then we would, you know, apply like maybe something like this. This provides 10% damage dealt, or 15% when you get 3 dupes into it, damage dealt for all allies for 2 turns, which, you know, is very good because Yaga has a very nice second skill, which you want to use very often. So there's most cases where you don't want to use your ult. This is probably really good on him because you can use it between either your skill or your ult, right? So you have that flexibility, unlike you know, a memory like this one, Perfect Synchronization, which can only be used during the ult. It's kind of like what you kind of prefer, but I think it's better this way just because, you know, Yaga skill 2 is way better than Nanami's skill 2. So you can sacrifice Nanami's skill 2 and use this ult with the memory instead. It just all depends on the situation and the scenario, right? You, like I said, you don't have to use this. You can use support memories, like one for healing, stuff like that, because they are supports, right? So supports obviously are going to have support memories, ones that kind of help you either survive or charge your ults or do more damage. And then your carry is usually going to have a memory that either charges up their ult quicker or does damage, right? That's usually how you're going to build your team. Hopefully I was very thorough, and, you know, I explained a lot of it, so that way you can kind of understand how to build your teams and kind of, you know, positioning and all that stuff that the game doesn't really teach you, right? But other than that, I appreciate you guys for watching, and obviously stay tuned for the other guides. There's going to be, this is the series, so there's going to be 2 other guides that I'm going to also be talking about, maybe even 3, right? So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.